Welcome all to the fourth plenary session of this conference. So far, we have established that a critical goal of world Christianity is to account or to call to account theological disciplines and fields of study, including itself, in terms of insofar as curricula have, been represented, have only represented local forms of knowledge as universal. And so world Christianity, therefore, offers a constructive space for the task of developing differential in methods, theories, and practices. And the idea is to nurture new rationalities. And what more space for that, than in teaching. And so this afternoon, we focus on teaching ecumenism. And I have a very accomplished panel. Even though in my introduction there, I will introduce them very sketchily, but they represent wealth of experience. And, they have impressive backgrounds and CVs. That I think will be evident, from the depth of their presentations. So allow me to introduce to you the first speaker, Professor Dr. Tiniko Maluleke is Professor of Theology and currently Senior Research Fellow and Deputy Director of the University of Pretoria's Center for Advancement of Scholarship in Pretoria, South Africa. His topic, Theology and Ecclesiology in Africa, the Ecumenical Factor. Over to you, Tiniko.
Thank you very much, Kuzipa, my good friend, and thank you very much, friends who are joining us here. I am very privileged to give this short talk. My written paper is too long. It's about 8,000 words. So I'm going to read the first part as slowly as possible, and I will stop whenever I run out of time, and we will be able to take the other issues in discussion. I start my paper with the subheading of the ecumenical idea. And for me, in referring to the World Council of Churches simply as le Conseil Œcuménique, the French language does much more than merely reduce the number of words that are used in the name of the World Council of Churches. It centralizes and introduces the notion, which, though implicit in the English appellation World Council of Churches, is nevertheless fundamental to the identity of the Council. At its simplest, this notion refers to the pursuit of the ideal of unity and cooperation among Christian churches, which, though confessing the Lordship of Jesus Christ, partaking in baptism in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, may nevertheless be different in terms of doctrine, identity, and history. The implicit suggestion is that Christian churches have more, or certainly enough, in common to be able to bear Christian witness to the world together. The pursuit of ecumenism can be justified on contextual, theological, and biblical grounds, as well as on historical precedents that date back to the early church. It can be argued that one of the most faithful and effective ways of participating in the Missio Dei comes about when different churches and different Christians from different churches and different places pray, worship, theologize, and act together, physically or virtually, as we have come to know it. However, as institutions steeped in dogma, history, and tradition, The missional calling of the churches constantly has to grapple with the denominational inclination of most churches. That is the pull towards denominational purity, as well as the predilection for self-preservation and self-propagation. While all denominations constantly draw from their spiritual ancestries and doctrinal lineages in times of trouble and uncertainty, ecumenism tends to be the orphan which can wither away and die if not adopted by as many churches as possible. To paraphrase Matthew 8:20, we could say, churches have dens and denominations have nests, but ecumenism often has no place to lay its head. Churches tend to view God, humanity, and the world through the lenses of their own doctrines, their own confessions, and their own histories. From these brief opening remarks, it becomes clear that while ecumenism may be an ecclesiastical public good, it is not one that can or should be taken for granted, if only because ecumenism is not the natural disposition of many churches. Some churches are more open to ecumenism than others, so they make various efforts to integrate and mainstream ecumenicity within their teachings and practices. Now, there is a famous line in the 1867 memoir of Italian politician, novelist, and painter Massimo d'Azeglio, which may or may not originate from him, but he has certainly made it famous. And he said, "We have made Italy, now we must make Italians." To parachute and paraphrase that saying in ecumenical language, one may say that if the ecumenical bodies that have been established for the past 70 odd years are to remain alive and influential, our universities, our colleges, our seminaries must deliberately, diligently, and constantly produce ecumenically minded people. As I write this essay, there are viral video clips of members of the Pan-African Parliament brawling, kicking one another, and threatening to kill one another, circulating in South Africa. The Pan-African Parliament is based in Midrand, South Africa. It's an organ of the African Union. Among others, it was designed as a model and an embodiment of what an African parliament might look like if African states were to cooperate more structurally and more visibly. But watching the ongoing shenanigans in the Pan-African Parliament, the dream of African unity feels so near and yet so far away. Once again, the words of d'Azeglio come to mind. We have built the African Union, but have we built union-minded Africans to populate its structures and give it strategic directions? At the center of the current brawl within the PAP is a contest for control of the parliament by regional power blocks. But the more fundamental question is, what comes first between the structures and the people necessary to enliven it? And you could take the same question and apply it to the churches. Unless the churches continue to produce a veritable cadre of clergy persons, church leaders, theologians, thinkers, and visionaries whose minds and whose spirits are steeped in the values and principles of ecumenicity, ecumenism will remain fragile and sporadic. In building our Italy, we dare not forget to build the Italians. In building our ecumenical structures, we dare not forget to build the men and the women necessary to breathe life into these structures. In building our denominational and congregational structures, we dare not forget to build the kind of congregants and members who have both the aptitude and the attitude for ecumenism. One clear and proven strategy for mainstreaming the ecumenical vision within a denomination is theological education. For this reason, the mainstreaming of ecumenism in theological curricula is not a nice to have, but a need to have. the task of equipping both lay people and clergy people with both the arts and the crafts of ecumenism eminently belongs, albeit not exclusively, to theological education. So the theological academy, college, seminary, and university is both the place in which ecumenically minded leaders are workshopped and a think tank in which ecumenism is constantly being rethought, reinvented, and reimagined. Now, to practice ecumenism, there are certain creative tensions we need to keep in touch. And I bring this from my African context. The first is that ecumenism should not be reduced either to some purely disembodied, mystical, otherworldly, or only some pragmatic series of government or NGO-like practical programs and interventions. The best forms of ecumenism occur when the appropriate creative tension is kept between the idealism of ecumenism and the realism of not only the divisions within and between the churches, but the brokenness of the world in which the churches must bear witness. I jump a few sections and go now to what I call outsourced ecumenism, which we have seen in Africa. Building on the idea of ecumenism as an ecclesiastical orphan, which I noted above, sometimes what happens is that denominations and churches simply outsource ecumenism to ecumenical bodies, so that all issues and people ecumenical are referred, delegated, or even relegated to ecumenical bodies. And some churches are willing to pay ecumenical bodies to do the ecumenical legwork for them. In this way, ecumenism becomes a specialization reserved more for specialized ecumenical bodies and less for the local denominations. And in Africa, we have seen this again and again. In my own country, South Africa, the prophetic role of the South African Council of Churches under the leadership of such seasoned ecumenists as Desmond Tutu, Frank Chikane, Brigelia Bam, and others, we have seen that in the struggle against apartheid, ecumenism, which was basically sponsored and supported by outsiders. I'm looking at my time. I'm trying to keep my own time. Suffered greatly when such sponsorship was removed. And it is sponsored ecumenism in terms of the theologies that sponsor it, but also the finances that sponsor it. We have also seen the collapse of the Federal Theological Seminary, one of the beacons of ecumenism, where the likes of Mvume Dandala, the former AACC General Secretary, Itumeleng Musala, leading Black theologian, Purity Malinga, current presiding bishop of the Methodist Church in Southern Africa, Kozam Gojo, now late lecturer of FETSEM and former TRC commissioner, and Desmond Tutu himself, Bani Pichana, and many, many others. That seminary, which relied on outside financing, collapsed. It also relied, if you like, theologically on outside sponsorship. Now, in order to develop what I suggest is an expanded view of ecumenism in Africa, we need to look at African theology as a case study of what such expanded view of ecumenism may look like. If you go back to the earliest arrival of Christian theology in Africa, of course, theology in Africa is much older than Christian theology in Africa. If we understand theology as a systemic study and structured reflection on divinity, which is expressed in thought, word, ritual, prayer, industry, culture, song, and dance, then theology in Africa predates by far the arrival of the colonialist who came carrying the gun in his right hand and the Bible in his left hand. It predates by far the arrival of the slave buyer who came carrying a sack of money in one hand and the Quran in the other. And if theology is faith-seeking understanding, as that great son of Africa, St. Augustine of Hippo, has taught us, then theology in Africa is almost as ancient as the birth of humanity itself. I wish to suggest that alongside Bediako and others, that the first bunch of theologians in Africa, who may have also been the first bunch of theologians in the world, your St. Augustine of Hippo and others, were constantly trying to relate two worlds, the worlds of their past and its religions and cultures, and the new world into which they were being incorporated of Christianity. And I want to suggest that that is the birth of ecumenism. Already, there is ecumenism right there. So whether he was aware of it or not, St. Augustine was an ecumenist. Whether he was aware of it or not, John Beatty, Bediako, Peko, and others were ecumenists. And Bediako, of course, has made this argument much more articulately than I can make. So that is the heart of ecumenism in Africa, the fact of the origins of Christian theology there. Now, if you look at African theology today, which is the formal and written type of African theology, which could be more or less 75 years old now, starting in the 50s, once again, you see the ecumenical factor playing a big role there. Because without ecumenism, you would not have had the initial stirrings and the flowering of African theology, either in West Africa among the theologians in the DRC Congo, or in Southern Africa among the theologians of Black theology. You'll find that it was bodies like ITWOT that they helped to create the atmosphere and the platform for African theology to develop. It was seminaries like FEDSEM, to which I referred, which were, if you like, the incubators of African theology. And some of the crucial dimensions of African theology today owe their genesis from the ecumenical factor. So decoloniality or decolonialism is one such thing, which goes back, if you like, to how Black theology came about in South Africa, the link with the work of fellow Black theologians in North America, with the work of theologians in South America, and educationists like Paulo Freire. The same thing goes to the later period when people like Jesse Mugambi came up with his own idea of reconstruction theology. It would not have been possible for Jesse Mugambi to invent reconstruction theology had there not been ITWOT before him, had there not been the All Africa Conference of Churches providing the platform in the early 90s for him and Kamana and others to say, as the 21st century is coming around, African theology cannot fold its beds and disappear, but has to reconstruct itself, which is where the idea of reconstruction comes from. Certainly, there is also the important dimension of the ecumenism of reconciliation. Reconciliation, which is what Desmond Tutu has been working on through the South African TRC Commission, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Reconciliation having been what Rwanda has had to go through after the genocide in 1994, different models from South Africa, but reconciliation all the same. You could argue that in northern Uganda, even though the war seemed like never ending, there was reconciliation, and in the works of people like Emmanuel Katongole, Desmond Tutu, John Rusciana, and others, we see that dimension. Again, the ecumenical factor is very strong. Similarly, when we come to ecological theology in Africa, it is not done denominationally. In fact, I'm not aware of many denominations doing it on their own. It is again stamped by the dimension of ecumenism. Now, the same thing if you come to the theology of African women or African women's theology. So in 1989, Mercy Odioye has this vision, assisted by Letty Russell, by Brigelia Bam. She is at the World Council at that time, has the vision of bringing together women from all over Africa. And of course, they have that very first conference, which in which the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians was born. Now, if you look at that circle and its immense and impressive publication record, it is ecumenical. The glue that holds it together and the inspiration for its work comes from ecumenism. I'm not reading my paper now. I'm just going through some of the subheadings because I realized that how many minutes am I left with now? Just 1 minute.
Your time is up, actually.
Yes. Well, in my clock, it's 19 minutes, 32 seconds. So then I would have had time to talk a little bit about the ecumenical factor also in South African Black theology. I'll leave it there. I think I've done enough to paint a framework and to paint a picture of where my paper goes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for putting on the table ecumenism as an ecclesiastical public good that should not be taken for granted, and for also giving us, the African theology as a case study and the number of themes that arise from that. Thank you. Without further ado, we will move on to Professor Dr. Yulia Vidovic, who is a professor of history of ecumenical councils and bioethics at the Orthodox Institute of Theology. My French fails me to read it in French as it is written at Sancerre in Paris, France. Bienvenue.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. I feel very much honored, and I am going out so much enriched, even though the conference is not finished. I am also the assessor, Orthodox assessor of the Institute, of which I will speak to you today. And I would like to share with you many greetings of my two colleagues, and you will understand the organization of this institute, the director of the institute, and Sophie Vivier-Morechan, which is Catholic, and my Protestant colleague from the Protestant Faculty of Theology, Frédéric Chavel. They are sorry not to be able to be with us today because we are having our 4-day synthesis of years, so they really express their regrets not to be today with us. As an Orthodox, we usually start from Adam and Eve, our presentation, but it wouldn't be the case for me. For me today, I will start with year of 2006, October 2006. After completing my theological studies in Belgrade, I joined ISEO. This is this higher Institute of Ecumenical Studies, and I will share with you PowerPoint presentation is just to be able to see some photos as it becomes much vivid. I hope you see it. So I would like to speak to you about the specificities of this ecumenical teaching and the ecumenical teaching at this higher Institute of Ecumenical Studies, which we call in France Institut Supérieur d'Études Écuméniques, which is the abbreviation is ISEO. So when I joined ISEO as a master's student, wishing to specialize in patristics, Father Yves-Marie Blanchard, the director of ISEO at the time, received me with his own enthusiasm, telling me that it was within the higher Institute of Ecumenical Studies that I would best discover the fathers. ISEO was for me a laboratory for the translation of tradition, which corresponds perfectly to the patristic vision of theology. Not only did we have to learn to translate tradition to ourselves and to our contemporary world, but we also had to translate it to each other, the Orthodox to the Catholics to the Protestants, and so on. It was a place of meeting, learning, and listening. It was also the place, as Father Yves-Marie Blanchard used to say, where one could truly rediscover and reappropriate its own tradition, the traditions of his own church and the own church. Indeed, we were obliged to put aside ready-made theological formulas whose ins and outs we did not necessarily perceive, reformulating them in our own way to make them audible and comprehensible to our brothers and sisters in Christ. This was a difficult exercise as it required a patient study of historical frameworks, conceptual and systematic formulations, etc. Ecumenism is in itself a work of memory and a care of memories, because in order to understand the other, it is indispensable to understand one's own challenges to which one has had to face in one's own history or currently in one's own cultural or geographical area. It requires an openness that is not self-evident, especially nowadays when identity-based faults seem to lend themselves to provide security and protection. This demand for an ecumenical rediscovery of tradition, and the tradition should be in big T, was voiced by the founder of ISEO, Father Marie-Joseph Le Guillou, whose vision of the ecumenical task remains relevant even today. He wrote, "The ecumenical task par excellence cannot consist of a set of diplomatic arrangements between separate communities, however sympathetic they may be. It is to question the foundations of true Christian thought, both philosophical and theological. The ecumenical task is that which helps me to recognize in the community and ecclesial witness of the other the help to be more faithful to the Lord myself." This is the spirit that has animated the work of the ISEO since its foundation. The Institute is an academic institute for training, research, and meetings supported by 3 theological faculties in Paris: Theologicum, the Protestant Faculty of Theology, and the Saint-Serge Institute of Orthodox Theology, and which moreover brings together teachers from various confessions and institutions. Various rich collaborations are part of the long history of the ISEO. We are actually celebrating 54 years. We can mention the Istina Center, the community of Chepton, the monastery of Beauce, the abbeys of Bec-et-Loing and Ligugé, the community of Thésée, the Conference of European Churches, and of course, the World Council of Churches, the Ecumenical Institute of Beauvais, of Jerusalem, but we should not forget also the different faculties of Orthodox theology in Greece, Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, etc. Since its foundation in 1967, its vocation has been to articulate the training of specialists and the sensitization of the general public to ecumenical issues. Unlike other meeting places offering pastoral courses, the ISEO has taken great care to maintain an academic and diploma level. Thus, on the one hand, it trains ministers, religious men and women, and committed lay men and women in ecumenical reflection, while at the same time ensuring that academic research is valued. On the other hand, it demonstrates that ecumenical formation cannot be understood only as one of the specialized fields, alongside biblical, liturgical, pastoral, and catechetical questions, but that it must be integrated into any theological curriculum. The Institute is placed under the patronage of the Council of Christian Churches in France. This highly important patronage allows it to be rooted in the ground. The ecumenical meeting place is thus an integral part of the academic training, particularly in its discovery and encounter of Christian churches course. The Institute listens to and serves the different Christian communities and churches. It is a place for meetings between people dedicated to theological reflection at university level. By the scope of its proposal and the originality of its interactive three-voice pedagogy, it represents a unique institute in France, at least. In other words, the ecumenical theology proposed by ISEO, whose core is the academic contribution, strives to integrate a global perspective, including the pastoral and spiritual dimensions. To take up the adage of Father Marie-Joseph Le Guillou, the founder of and the first director of ISEO, prayer is the foundation and source of all ecumenical work. Why did I feel it was important to speak to you today about ISEO ecumenical approach, particularly when we speak about in this conference of the teaching of ecumenism in the context of global Christianity? Since its foundation, ISEO has offered an original pedagogy of ecumenism. What does this originality consist of? I will draw here on proposal put forward by my colleague and friend, Father Luc Forestier, the former director of the Institute, who has thoroughly explored the dossier of Father Le Guillou, the school's founder. Already, according to Father Le Guillou, the originality of ISEO is played out on 3 levels at least. The first is that of its rich and diverse collaborations. The second refers to the training of different audiences, and the third to the particularity of its partnerships. In fact, in the presentation of the first ISEO study program for the academic year of 1967 and 68, Father Le Guillou shows that it is indeed a question of the commitment of the 3 theological faculties and not only of 1 or 2 confessional representatives. This is in itself was to ensure the fraternal cooperation of their teaching staff and their students. It is interesting to note that in 1967, statutes equated Saint-Serge, Protestant Faculty of Theology, the Ecumenical Institute of Strasbourg and Bossé as conditions for the very existence of the Institute. Similarly, in Article 5 on the teaching staff, it is clearly stated that the program of studies is established with the help of these same institutions that we would like to continue to make of. So the practice of 3-voice courses and seminars thus becomes the specific mark of the Institute. We can see that the first ISEO program already sets up a series of 4 seminars per semester on a wide variety of topics and with the collaboration of many Orthodox, Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran, and Reformed teachers. Throughout in its 54-year history, ISEO has developed a number of 3-voice courses and seminars. The list is, as you can imagine, very long, but by way of illustration, we can mention some of them that have been offered recently. Unities and Ruptures in the 16th Century Church. That was a 3-voice history course. Ecclesiology in Debate, 3-voice course in Christian Spirituality. The Enigma of Evil, a 3-voice fundamental theology course. Ecumenical Systematic Theology Seminar on the Joint Declaration on Justification. Biblical and Patristical Seminar on the figure of the Apostle Peter. Interdisciplinary Seminar on Healing. Interdisciplinary Seminar on Ethics and Church Communion. In the program of this academic year, the ISEO proposed 4 ecumenical seminars with 3 of even 4 voices, since it included in its exchange the Evangelical Faculty of Theology, Faculté Libre de Théologie Évangélique of Vaux-sur-Seine. And during this academic year, the Ecumenical Seminary History of the Great Ecumenical Agreements, then the one whose interest was to make known the theologians involved in ecumenism, as Karl Barth, Elisabeth Bersigel, Yves Congar, Walter Kasper, John Zizulas, and many others. Next year, the seminar will be on spirit and method of ecumenical dialogue, and the ecumenical seminar in systematic theology entitled Questions of Trinitarian Theology will be added. So one of the original features of these seminars insisted already Father Guillaume when he set them up at the time of the creation of the Institute, is that they are run jointly by professors of two confessions, Orthodox and Catholic, or Catholic and Protestant. Ecumenical dialogue thus becomes a concrete reality. The students discover on the faces of their professors the reactions to this or that position. The professors discover also better the reactions of young Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant theologians to certain fundamental questions posed to ecumenism. These seminars are indeed a privileged place for ecumenical dialogue. The double innovation, pedagogical and ecumenical, is deployed here. Not only do students participate fully in the course and seminars, contributing their own skills, but they also experience concretely what dialogue means, and at the academic level, thought the relations between two and today 3 or even 4 teachers of different faiths and the frankness of the reactions to the arguments put forward. This original and challenging three-voice pedagogy stages the interdenominational debate within an academic framework that simultaneously ensures the confessional character of theology and its critical relationship to sources and authorities. This pedagogy enables students to become more aware of the nature of the doctrinal elaborations that characterize the theology's thought in their own denomination, while at the same time gaining a better understanding of the position of other churches. And for the teachers, participation in such three-way courses or seminars is also an opportunity to risk theological discourse in front of 2 other theological colleagues whose presuppositions or methods may be convergent or divergent, thus referring on own elaborations while discovering other authors or other fields of theology. Finally, the direction of the ISEO is now 3 voices, since the director of the ISEO has an assessor from each of the other 2 theological faculties, which ensures fluid relations with the 3 faculties, both in the ordinary life of ISEO and at the time of programming. In addition to these courses and seminars, there is also a course entitled Discovering and Meeting Christian Churches. So you can see some of our students last February visiting Greek Oriental Church in Paris. And the first session of which took place in 2017-2018. It provides a balance between a lecture by the trainers or teacher and an encounter with Christian communities in the round. In other words, the teachings that take place in the morning are supported by visits to churches and parishes on the same day in the afternoon. So we arranged to have a whole community there in order to be able to share with their own experience. So what we can say of its teaching is now structured around degree of certification program specific to ISEO. So you can do a master or different diplomas. And what's also specific and very interesting when you speak of this experience of ecumenism is the, what we call the colloquium of the faculties, which was installed during the mandate of Father Hervé Legrand between 1999 and 2002, who wanted to really enrich in ecumenism with the research. So he initiated the international colloquium organized by ISEO, and this colloquium brings together around 2,050 participants each year. The organization of these international colloquia often is in partnership with other schools or institutions, brings together a large number of actors in the ecumenical life of our churches. It supports and publishes research on the progress of the ecumenical movement and the ecumenical dimension of theological research. These are regularly accompanied by the publication of the acts, and we could mention in particular the one of March 2018, as it was a jubilee year for ISEO, which was celebrating its 50th anniversary. The colloquium, which had as its theme New Territories of Ecumenism, provided an opportunity to closely at the shifts that taken place in ecumenism over the last 50 years and to listen to the calls for the future. He clearly revealed that after the post-war years, when ecumenism was lived with a liberating, daring, and prophetic enthusiasm that was denoted by intense and promising theological work, it entered only a few decades later from the 18th onwards into a phase of stiffening and disenchantement. As Bishop Didier Berthet, president of the French Catholic Bishops' Council for Christian Unity and Relations with Judaism, pointed out in his speech, the actors of ecumenism are getting older and seem to be becoming rarer. The urgency of interreligious dialogue is overshadowing in some way that of Christian unity. Theological dialogue is seeking into what is problematic and divisive, especially in the ecclesiological sphere. This phase of stiffening has no doubt been accentuated by various geopolitical events in our European societies, which are experiencing an identity crisis and are much more insecure. We can see a withdrawal on many levels, and this also affects the ecumenical approach. We must be aware of this and work with these difficulties. The current phase, and I will finish, presents us with a fundamental upheaval. First of all, it is a statistical upheaval with the numerical explosion of evangelical Christianity, particularly in the Pentecostal movement. This movement, which is first and foremost that of an undeniable spiritual and missionary dynamisms, poses new challenges in the search for Christian unity, particularly in the work of the ecclesiological foundations of this approach. So we explored it during our before 2 years colloquium on healing. Another major upheaval consists of these new territories which are taking shape in our societies and which are often not very territorial. Explosion and omnipresence of social networks, multiplication and diversification of memberships, etc. They immediately impose new territories on the ecumenical approach. Finally, our European or Western societies are becoming brutally aware that they can no longer call themselves Christian, at least we feel it in France. This realization is very clear in recent and recurring spiritual and pastoral literature, which pose the problem, how can we be Christian in a world that is no longer Christian? So this new situation places all our churches in the status of minority communities and requires us to be truly confessing churches together. Thus, in addition to the urgency of dialogue, there is an increasingly urgent need for common witness. And this, we come to what can be said to be the roadmap of ISEO. Shared, which means the shared experience of the praise of God, which has become quite natural among the younger generations, as the example of the Thésée meeting shows, charismatic witness, ethical witness, and diaconal witness in the service of the most needy. Thus, more than ever, ecumenical life must integrate together doctrine, spirituality, moral life, and common confessional witness. So, while it is in fact from within this ecumenical space in which we are situated that we are able to formulate authentic questions based on what is common and questioning each other. From this mutual anteriority, to use the idea put forward by Bishop Didier Berthet, we clearly perceive that the burdens carried and lived by the other are also our own. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry if I go beyond 20 minutes.
Thank you very much for that. The thread that carries through from the previous presentation is to link, to see theological education as an important strategy, for workshopping and, thinking through ideas about ecumenism. And I flag, several ideas, that, characterize that strategy: partnerships, collaboration, with the patronage of various ecumenical platforms, partners, and councils, which from the other presentation, takes the intentionality, of those who are within this space, to ensure that the renewal of the ecumenical vision is continuing. So thank you very much for presenting a case study of ISEL, to add to this conversation. Let's move on. Professor Dr. Eunhee Kim is a feminist theologian and professor at Presbyterian University and Theological Seminary in Seoul, South Korea. Her topic is teaching ecumenism for a discriminately divided world, post-pandemic living as mattering and making with. Over to you, Eunhee.
Okay. Thank you for giving me a chance to sharing. Thanks for giving me a chance to share my ecumenical friendship. I will I have a problem. I will find my PPT. Okay, give me a chance. Okay. My presentation title, Teaching Ecumenism for Discriminatively Divided World, Post-Pandemic Living as Mattering and Making With. This porous of my school where I am teaching Christian ethic. First topic is the pandemic accelerating inequality. Upgrading inequality is the notion by Harari in his book, Homo Deus. The way inequality is spread, widened, and intensified over the world has been evolved as technological development has brilliant progressed. Some elite human beings upgrade themselves into superhuman beings with various scientific and technological innovations such as robotic, nanotechnology, AI, and so on, while most mediocrities who does not have financial affordability for it are delegated to non-being, like Tama Onta, those who are not, in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 28. The vaccination become more marked for privileged in an age of Homo Deus. This really sounds inhumane. Some people were dying without hope somewhere in Africa, while some people were busying in buying stock. There has been two kinds of being, winner and loser in this world. Since the modern Western of imperialization, loser means becoming a non-being, which is like being there in this life. People are afraid of becoming loser. To protect themselves from being loser, people desperately make money, with which they can do almost everything they want. Possessing money is quite equal to becoming a winner. In modern Western, particularly, got obsessed with a race of survival in which the rule of winner takes all is taken for granted. When the idea of humanism and human rights started to sprout up, all of individuals were afraid that others would take my rights and do in the modern struggling for existence. But we have to remember that the age of humanism was that of Western imperialism, or that of former become a humanized face of the modern Western imperialism. Instead of treating them outside the boundary of the us as equal human being, the modern man invaded the others in other countries and nations outside of European nations and colonized them in the name of enlightenment. As all of us know well, the modern man never educated other race and nation for their enlightenment. If they had to, they did as much as they could make them collaborators for the colonization. Again, imperialism is the other face of humanism. The modern man saw life as infinite struggle for survival, not as a symbiosis and symbiosis making with. He saw the world consisting of individuals in an infinite competition, which was justification for his imperial invasion into other non-European countries like Asia and Africa and North and South America. Modern science like Darwin's evolutionary theory and Marxist population theory supported the competition theory as natural law. Modern men projected what they experience in their lives onto nature and those onto the world. As long as one sees human being as individual, the logic of competition will never go away from our eyes of seeing things. However, life consists of a collaboration, which is symbiosis, that is making with. Bee needs flowers to get honey, and flowers need bees for their pollination. There is no winner or loser. They do not compete each other for survival. Life thrives always as together. The pandemic probably is the index finger to point out that we swim or are drawn together. Next topic is ecumenism for global family. What meaning does it have to teach ecumenism in this pandemic world? What does ecumenism have to say regarding the spread inequality over the globe? Does ecumenism have any alternative to the infinite competition of the global capitalism? I suggest that ecumenism is about the divine family, not human family. What is the divine family? What is different does divine family make from human family? I think our family relation in God are formed by promise and solution, not by blood tie. As a matter of fact, human family is not only about blood tie. Adoption is a long-held cultural practice. When we think of family, It is almost always about self-sameness, which probably derive from race, nation, ethnic group, and so on. Whatever identification comes up to our mind is just abstraction of imaginary self-sameness. There are no such things like nation, race, gender, ethnic group, and so on. They are our constructs to identify our self-sameness with the others. Indeed, we are all different from person to person. What human family forms at the outset, the couples are not the same kind of or self-same replica. In other words, family is not something given but to make. Adoption is a way to create a family, and according to the Bible, we are adopted ones. Imitating the vocabulary from 1 Corinthians, in this divided world between the heavens and have-nots, or between those who are 타온타, and those who are not 타메온타. What was needed is a creation of a new family, which is not based on blood tie, and this is the community in Acts chapter 2. The Acts community shows an alternative family in which one knows the other's needs. As we well known, ecumenism derives from Greek oikumene, and oikumene comes from oikos, which means house. House is the physical foundation of family. In this sense, ecumenism is about earth, our house we inhabit. Although its meaning was changed as belonging to the universal church via the late Latin oecumenicus, the etymological contains the trace of a notion of earth as a house. In our time, the notion of ecumenism is commonly used to signify the unity of Christianity, regardless denomination. Ecumenism is based our home. Ecumenism is about our home and family. So when one say of ecumenism as unity of Christian, our home and family are confined to Christian. However, we believe God created all beings and things in universe. So the boundary of our family and home should not be confined to certain religious people, to Christian only, to anthropos only. The divine family in the Garden of Eden include animal and plants. God does not naming living being, but has Adam's name them. It is the extension of the divine commandment in Genesis to thrive and to fill and master, to land and to rule over living beings. The first step to rule over them well is to know them. This is alternative model of sovereignty to imperial dictatorship in Asian empire. Adam's naming animal and plants means that they are a family in the garden God built. Indeed, the pandemic urges us to think about the primordial family, which include all living beings as a family. Family needs a house to live. The earth is the house of all being. The earth as our home does not consider of anthropomorphs only. Indeed, our actual house includes many other beings like a house building, furniture, kitchen utensil, bathroom supplies, and so on. We are living with other beings, making life together. Okay, because of time, I have to skip. As a matter of fact, we sapiens had lived in an extended family, not in a nuclear family, which is a modern invention in a way to emphasize the singularity and human rights of individual. However, nowadays we are too much individualized in a way not to kill anybody but oneself. Although kin can be a form of extended family representing not biological, self-sameness and family based upon different kind of including animal and non-organic beings. Okay. Third topic is living with matter. We are living in a mattering via the interaction of being and things. Our living is not just social and political, but also biological material, biological and material. Indeed, it is material in a sense that our living is based upon collaboration with material being. Charles Darwin wrote in a foundation of vegetable mold through the action of a worm with observation on their habit. According to him, worm inaugurate human culture. While he closely observed the English worm, according to Jane Bennett, Darwin's claims as following: worm did it by making vegetable mold, which makes possible seedling of all kinds, which makes possible on earth hospitable to human, which makes possible the cultural artifacts, ritual, plants, and endeavors human history. Of course, English worms do not have any intention to build up or help human culture. Rather, what Darwin said is that human culture is the production of entanglement with other beings and material. As all of us know, the climate change and the ecological crisis are real cause of this pandemic. Animal viruses have been losing their habitats as the forests are rapidly gone due to logging and reckless development only for making money. For their survival, animal viruses naturally have found their new habitat in human and livestock who are most spread and thrive on the planet. Then the pandemic is natural result. Zhang Zhu, who is an Eastern philosopher, says of thingsification, 물화, in his allegory of butterfly dream. He wondered if he is dreaming of becoming butterfly or if butterfly is dreaming of becoming him. It alludes a mutual transformation between butterfly and Zhang Zhu himself. For him, all things are the same. 만물제동. The state of I am derived from the level of being, such as quantum level, electrical charge, molecular level, organism level, leptitian, mammalian, and neocortex level. Indeed, we humans are part of nature and things. Thus God ordered human to eat vegetable and fruits, animal to eat vegetable, according to Genesis chapter 1, verse 29 to 30. We all know there is some debates about theological foundation about vegetarianism, but one thing for sure, that we affect and are affected by other things and material. Our bones are formed by the mineralization of a certain portion of the flesh. The mineral world is in our bone. Indeed, also dietary fats has effect on human moods and cognitive disposition. Eating omega-3 fatty acids can make a prisoner less prone to violent acts. Inattentive school children better able to focus, and bipolar person less depressed. In other words, I am what I eat. We are indeed interacting with the material world. Food material are not passive supplies for human nutrition, but it rather has its own productive power. In this sense, for example, to eat the chip is to enter into the assemblies in which the I is not necessarily the most decisive operator.
We are running out of time. Could I ask you to wind?
Okay, I am almost. Last topic, ecumenical imagination for symbiosis. Can we live together on this planet? In ecosystem, organism, including a cell, is the process of symbiosis, a collaboration living together. Once Francis Varela and Humberto Maturana present a theory of organism with the concept of autopoiesis, which means self-production. Production is for them, organism is a system of self-production, not a system of struggling for survival, competition, each other. However, Donna Haraway changed the prefix auto with sim in a way to explain that helping or organism is always an already multiple, not a singular. Organism as symbiosis is not one self, but multi-selves. In other words, predation is not the highest law of jungle, but it is serve for higher principle of symbiosis. We are making life together. And in this sense, all beings are the extended family, sharing the same fate. Ecumenism was living together when Christianity was divided. Also, it was about overcoming religious conflict when religion was divided people. Now ecumenism needs to be about symbiosis, making life with other beings, especially in this Anthropocene, when people were divided not just by race, nation, gender, class, but also anthropocentric way of life. Okay. I need to make short. They are not, okay, animal, plants, vegetable, and mineral are our kins. As Haraway argued, they are our extended family. We need to know what they need, why they are in fatal dangers. Because family members know each other's needs, as in Act Chapter 2, verse 45. What we need is not just eco-friendly ecumenism, but a seriously symbiotic ecumenism, from which one treats every being on this planet part of our extended family. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. If we say that world Christianity, creates a space for generating new knowledge that's not conceived in isolation, the local and translocal ways of knowing, I think I hereby put on the table in very metaphysical ways, challenging, boundaries of family. Without going further, I would just say, please, if you have questions, this is the time. To all three speakers, you can raise your hand, the electronic hand, and indicate that you would like to ask a question or make a comment or any intervention, as the case may be. Jen?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kusipa. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the presenter, and also Professor Kusipa for the moderate. I'm Chena Peter from the Protestant Church in Eastern Indonesia, Protestant Church in Maluku. We know that the pandemic has not only revealed old secrets about injustice system, but also emphasize the gap between rich and poor. As Professor Unhei Kim said, pandemic upgrading inequality. My question, how do we teach ecumenism in situation like that? How can we even encourage maximum result from teaching ecumenical? How do we encourage a Christian group from the rich country to push their congregation, not just to understand, but uplifting their action for the Christian from the poor countries? Because when Professor Unhei Kim put a living as a mattering and making with, my question is, which life, which group, which community? Because when we teach ecumenism, we must be able to present all representative of life in all contexts. And also one representative is not enough. And also one representative also has a multiply meaning attached to their whole understanding of life. How do we collaborate all these things? How do we uplifting the result for teaching ecumenism so other Christian community not just have knowledge but also empathy and make some effort with action when Christian from, just for example, from indigenous scream about their forests, they know about their land. Also our brother and sister from Pacific, when they said about we are lose our island, our country. Pandemic is not just making us struggle with the life, but also our old situation for our land, for our country. All three of presenter can answer my question. Thank you, Professor.
Please take it away, presenter. She has presented the question to all of you, but primarily to Professor Kim.
So this is time for me?
Yes.
Yes,
But
I am not in this paper. The issue is very simple. Even though I explain complicated way, I am not suggesting human beings division in the dimension of economical, political, cultural, but I suggest we have to include those division and crisis between human being and nature, between sociology, social dimension and ecological dimension. So when you think about economical crisis, we have to always, it related to, connected to entanglement of a whole plenary situation. That's what I want to focus. Or let's imagine the Jesus time when Jesus was preaching about kingdom of God without lily in the field, without flying bird. How Jesus preached the kingdom of God? When he expressed his love to his 12 disciples in the Last Supper, without chair and table, bread and wine, how he expressed his deep love to the disciples. So we have, when we think about some crisis of earth, including human beings and animals and plants, we needed to some very complicated entanglement all over system in this earth.
Yeah, perhaps I could add to what Prof has just said now. For me, the COVID-19 pandemic, assists us in teaching ecumenism insofar as it reveals how vulnerable we are as human beings, regardless of confession or nationality or even gender or even class, although the richer nations and the more able nations have got more vaccines than the poorer nations, and they are making sure that they hold the vaccines, which is part of the problem that Prof was talking about. So it equalizes, it reminds us how equal we are, even though we are not, even though we are constantly trying to create inequality and division among ourselves. But what the pandemic also reminds us is our connectedness to nature and to the environment, insofar as there are theories that it may have originated either in a lab or from the environment, from the animal kingdom. So I find it interesting that the virus causes people not to be able to breathe ultimately. And if you think about that, the fact that we all need to breathe, the trees need to breathe, the animals need to breathe. George Floyd could not breathe when there was a foot on his neck. And so all these connections I think are possible to think about. And you can't think about them only in terms of denominational theology. We have to think ecumenically about all these interconnections. Thanks. Thank you.
Yes, Professor Vidovic.
I just wanted to thank my colleagues for responding, and I completely agree with what they said. I am just also amazed by the way, how do we understand the word ecumenism, but your opening is really great. And am very attentive to that. I want just to say that in our case, we've started to recall all different testimonies coming from our religious communities. How do they were confronted with the pandemic? So because what we realized that our church communities were touched by this experience, our families were touched by that. And so before giving any answers or before even trying to understand what was going on, we wanted to listen. And I think that that will be the huge lesson of humanity. And she will reveal our vulnerability. So I pretty much appreciated a speech of my colleague Kim when she started the presentation with this human hubris of post-humanism, and when we come to the fact that we are not even able to provide a machine in order to breathe. So thank you very much for this very good question.
Thank you. Thank you.
I saw a question in the chat from Hubert. Would you like to voice it? It was directed to Professor Vidovic.
Thank you. I don't need to add much to it. I was struck several times. I think Professor Vidovic referred to the three voices methodology, Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox. And then it dawned on me that actually we live in a Christian world that has become more plural and more complex than it was a century ago. And so I was playing a little bit, with the language. I mean, should you not move on to a four voices methodology? I then heard you say in your presentation, you were also talking about the evangelical faculty near Paris and the Pentecostal. So I think it's on your mind. But nevertheless, it is a question. It would be interesting to hear from you to what extent your institute is trying to listen also to the Pentecostal voice, the charismatic voices of the new forms of Christianity that are all around.
Yes, of course, we are integrating their presence in our seminars. We are now working on the fact that to have a structural collaboration with them. So for the time being, it is in progress, even though we really appreciate to work with them. We have this really great opportunity to have an open faculty because it is sometimes not obvious to collaborate with, because without wanting to offend anyone, some of these communities are very close. So even when we try to approach them, it seems a little bit like an offense, but we have really great chance to have this liberal faculty of evangelical studies in Paris. So we meet with them very often. They participate plenary in our seminars, and even in our group of research, where we are sharing the different topics of our own research. So we can, I can really say that we have very positive experience. And this colloquium on the healing, we were really, it was really amazing to see how our own church identities are changing in dialogue with these huge movements. We felt this here in France with even the Catholic Church. They are now publishing a lot of studies in the way how they perceive in their own communities the way how evangelical spirit is changing their own communities. So they are making some practices adapted to what we can see in the evangelical communities. And I see in our Orthodox school that we are trying to find similarities between our understanding of pneumatology and the presence of the spirit. So this is really a huge ground, and it needs to be explored. We are just at the beginning, if I may say so. But really a huge work to be done.
Thank you. In the chat, I see Henrik Peterson says, appreciate the combination of teaching on history and ideas of ecumenism and exposure to different church traditions. My experiences from the interreligious field suggest that the exposure and possibility of sharing basic conversations and meals together means quite a lot for conceptual understanding.
Yes, indeed. And just to add, I remember when I came to this institute coming from Serbia, we have had classes on ecumenism, but it was a bookly way to approach our friends, brothers and sisters in Christ. But when I entered this institute, I shared with them this experience of ordinary life. We became friends, and at that moment I realized how I am not aware of their history, of their context, of their own theology, the way how do they understand their theology. And so even though we are using the same wording, we understand completely other things. That's why I started this presentation by saying that this translation and this listening is very, very much important, and it can become very flourishing that we become friends with all those people with whom we share our daily life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Odaye or Pedroso Mateo says, Bosse combines the multicultural and the multi-confessional with studying, praying, and living together. So these are sort of additions to the case studies that we have listened to. Professor Wenge, you have a question.
Thank you very much. Thank all the three speakers for your wonderful speeches and lectures. Also thank you very much, Professor Kim, for your creative presentation on this symbiotic ecumenism. And I'm also very glad that you quote the Chinese Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi about 万物齐一, that is, all things are the same. But that also means that there are no actually substantial difference among all things. This will naturally lead to a kind of a pantheism. How would you distinguish that from pantheism? How would you deal with the relationship of the two? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I am a pantheism, not pantheism. Pantheism, something is godlike, but it's identified with God. But pantheism, it's like a God, imitate God, but it's not identified with God. So we are image of God. So everything God created, the Spirit dwells in everything, right? In this sense, I am a pantheist.
Well, with that, I will just give our speakers a minute each to wrap up and to just say your last words. I mean, not last words of your life, but last words of this plenary. Professor Maluleke, would you like to start since you are the first to speak?
I was muted, sorry. No, I really am just thankful for the invitation, for taking part in such a special session. I learned a lot from it, and thank you very much. That's all.
Professor Vidovic.
Thank you very, very much for this really brilliant exchange. I'm very much impressed of the openness of all the issues that were tackled. And I really, really hope that this will be, as a Russian proverb says, we meet once, but for the eternity. So I hope that we will continue our collaboration, at least here on Earth. So thank you very much.
Professor Kim.
Thank you for inviting me in this wonderful meeting. We are still suffering in pandemic world, but God God never stopped his loving peoples in this world. So we always remember God still sustained our earth and peoples.
Mm-hmm. So it remains for me to just thank you most sincerely for accepting our invitation and for walking through us through the changes brought by the pandemic, to reconfigure this conference, to this mode, and that you were able to adapt and to be able to deliver thought-provoking interventions that will continue to enrich our continued discussion on how to do formation in, dialoguing with the local as well as, translocal. What does ecumenical formation mean? Could I also thank the participants of this plenary? Thank you so much for being part of this process. Allow me also to thank our communications colleagues who are the unseen hosts, behind the scenes, underpinning not just this plenary delivery, but the entire conference. So shout out to you, my colleagues. Thank you very much. See you in the short paper presentations at 5.